Here, and it's my pleasure to announce our next speaker, which is Father John Hallowell. So, Father John, I picked up a quote online. He says, "Football, family, and faith, in the reverse order, are his favorite things." So, he's got 4 F's covered here. He's a Catholic priest, currently serving in Dearborn County, Indiana. He's known for his faith journey, public commentaries on Catholic teachings and events. So, Father Hallowell, if you'll.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor to be here with you all this morning. And so just a little bit about my story. I'm in my 16th year of being a Catholic priest at this point. And so I graduated from Hanover College in southeastern Indiana in 2001. And I told everybody I was going to be a priest, but that I wanted to use my math and teaching degrees for 2 years in the real world to find out how real people make it work. And so I did that. I taught and coached football and track at Bishop Chittard High School for 2 years. And so while I'm doing that, actually in 2002, the priest abuse crisis breaks out, and the Boston Globe really broke that wide open. And I'm really thankful that they did that. They ran a story for every day for about the next 3 years about the priest abuse crisis. And so I entered St. Meinrad Seminary in 2004, really wondering, does celibacy, if I become a priest, does celibacy make you harm children? And so I had that as in the back of my mind. Some people, that was some of the newspapers and organizations and so forth in the secular world were saying that. They were saying that, well, this abuse crisis is caused by celibacy. And so I wondered, but already I entered St. Meinrad in the seminary in 2004, and they already had really good programs, put in place to help us as priests or as seminarians, understanding and just kind of reflecting on how to live celibacy in a healthy way. And so I'm really thankful for that. So the bishops, you might recall, in 2005, they first did it in 2002, but then in 2005 they put together what was known as, is still known as the Dallas Charter. And the bishops put in charge of enforcing the Dallas Charter all over the country. They put in charge Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. And so I got ordained a priest in 2009 for the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. And so then in 2018, when it became known that Cardinal McCarrick was one of the worst abusers in the history of our church, the readings it was revealed on a Thursday in 2018, and then the readings that 2 days later, the first reading was, "Woe to the shepherds who scatter and mislead the sheep of my flock," right? And so I preached a righteously angry homily, and that homily went viral, and so that got me. The victim of priestly abuse that the Pennsylvania Attorney General picked to represent all victims, as he was announcing all these different lawsuits that were being filed against the Catholic Church. The victim's name was Bob Corby, and Bob Corby had been abused as a teenager, so he was in his late 70s at this point. So Bob Corby's counselor saw my homily, and then had Bob Corby watch it, and Bob Corby then talked to me, called me up, and we chatted on the phone. And so that was my first real opportunity to talk to a victim who had been abused by priests. And so a couple of months later, in early January of 2019, I made a prayer that if there was anything I could suffer for victims, I would do that willingly. And about a month later, I had my first seizure from a brain tumor. I didn't know it was a seizure, and I didn't know it was a brain tumor. I was running on the rectory. I have a treadmill in my rectory, and I was running on it, and I got lightheaded, and I laid down on the floor, and the right side of my body kind of started to tremor, But I didn't lose consciousness or anything. I had gotten lightheaded running before, and so I thought it lasted for about a minute. I sat up. I was like, I feel fine now. I almost called on 911, but then I was like, well, I don't really feel anything now. And so then I went up and showered and told the office staff, I was like, hey, this is what happened over in the rectory this morning running, and if it happens again, call 911. But it didn't until about 6 months later. I was running outside, and it was a little bit hotter than I was expecting, and so again it happened. I got lightheaded, laid down on the grass. The right side of my body started to kind of tremor a little bit, got up after about a minute and walked back to the rectory. And so the third time it happened, I was actually running outside, again in the woods with my best friend, Father Jonathan Meyer. And it happened again, and he said, Hallowell, you have to go and make an appointment with your doctor and get it checked out. So I did. I made an appointment with my doctor, and that led to basically so actually when I got back to Brazil, Indiana, which was one of my parishes at the time, I called the secretary of my doctor and I said, I need to schedule an appointment with Dr. Kiefer. And she said, Father, he retired 5 years ago. And so those of you who are wives here might have a similar situation where your husband struggled to get in for their yearly checkup. I was busted in that way. But luckily, my other parish also had a doctor who was about my age, and so he took me on as a patient. And so anyway, long story short, that kind of led to the Mayo Clinic. About 13 months after I made that prayer, in January of 2019, the Mayo Clinic, on the feast day of Our Lady of Lourdes in 2020, I got the diagnosis up there that it was a brain tumor. And almost immediately, as the words came out of the doctor's mouth, brain tumor, I knew that had been an answer to that prayer that I had made 13 months earlier. And so, again, that night, on the feast day of Our Lady of Lourdes, I got to have Mass in the chapel of Our Lady of Lourdes, which chapel is really the understatement probably of the year, because the way that the Mayo Clinic got started actually was there were Franciscan sisters in Rochester, Minnesota, and Jesus appeared to the head abbess at the time and said, go into town and find a Dr. Mayo. And so that's what happened. And so the Franciscan sisters were the nurses for the Mayo Clinic once it got started. And so they still had a chapel, which is, again, chapel is really kind of the understatement of one of the biggest understatements in the history of the world, because the chapel is really a Roman basilica. They brought over an architect from Rome, and he brought in all this Roman marble, and it's the most I studied in Rome, and it is a Roman basilica in Rochester, Minnesota. And so, again, I got to have Mass that night in the chapel of Our Lady of Lourdes, and that's what the chapel is named after. And so, again, Our Lady of Lourdes figures prominently, again, because I got the diagnosis up at Mayo Clinic on the feast day of Our Lady of Lourdes in 2020. That night, on the feast day of Our Lady of Lourdes, I typed up a blog post. And I said, I've been diagnosed with a brain tumor up here at the Mayo Clinic, and I'm offering, I made a prayer 13 months ago for any victims, if I could suffer anything. Again, I didn't think it was going to be a brain tumor. I thought maybe a broken foot or something like that. But God had, and again, there was really great peace as soon as I heard the words brain tumor as well. But anyway, so I typed up a blog post that night, and I just said, I prayed for this 13 months ago, and if you are a victim and this helps you, I don't expect it to help you, but again, if it does help you, then thanks be to God. And that blog post went viral. And I couldn't have the surgery for about a month, right? Because I was on blood thinner, and so I had to let that all move out of my body. So that blog post went viral. And so that then put me in touch with about 180 victims. And so some of them were victims who were living. I got to talk to parents of victims who had committed suicide. And so just a really sacred time, but then also just really a devastatingly heartbreaking time to talk to, again, victims and families of victims, and so forth. And so I went into the first surgery then up at the Mayo Clinic on March 13th of 2020 with about 180 names of victims, of families of victims. And so, yeah, and then so that my neurosurgeon called it perfectly. He's like, it's going to take you 5 days to wake up. And so my first memories of waking up are, and I was only awake for about 5 minutes each day, and it was the doctors and nurses coming in and telling my parents and Father Meyer and some of my brothers were up there as well, that the visiting hours are getting more and more restricted because of this thing called COVID. And so eventually, basically my mom was only allowed in for 2 hours every day, which was, I mean, I was fine. But again, I'm sure that they weren't, not being able to come in and see me very much. But so anyway, and we had planned, I had planned before I left the parishes, we had 10 weeks of subs planned and coming in, and we had no idea, obviously, when I was leaving that there was going to be COVID. So once I heard that all the churches in America were locked and shut down, my priority became getting back online as quickly as possible so that I could have masses, so that I could say the rosary online. I could just pray. I prayed the breviary, And so I was doing that from my hospital room. I was praying the rosary online once I got out. So it took me about 5 days again to wake up from the surgery, but then I got sent over to the rehab area of the Mayo Clinic, and so I spent a couple weeks in there. And so I had my smartphone, and I would just turn it on in the morning. I would just pray the rosary, and then I would say, I would just read we have breviaries, and so I just do morning prayer online live. And it was amazing, like thousands and thousands of people would watch. And I mean, they were watching, anybody that could find any Catholic priest that was doing anything Catholic online was getting thousands and thousands of viewers and followers and stuff, because again, everything was shut down. And so my first Mass I actually got to have on the feast of the Annunciation, which was March 25th. I had it in my bathroom. Luckily, I had my own hospital room, and I had it in the bathroom. There was a wonderful Catholic priest up there at the Mayo Clinic who helped me have that first Mass. I had it on the sink in the bathroom, and again, I had to sit in a wheelchair. I still wasn't able to walk, and so again, I had that first Mass on the feast of Our Lady of the Annunciation, and again, that was one of my parishes at the time, was Annunciation in Brazil, Indiana. So I got to have that Mass, and there were tens of thousands of people who watched that Mass live because, again, the churches were shut down. So I'm doing this now, every day online, rosary online, office of readings, Mass online, and so forth. About 6 weeks after that first surgery, there was an infection that was discovered. And so I had to go into emergency surgery because, again, once they cut the skull, which they had to do for the first surgery, if there's an infection, they have to go in and take that part of the skull out, right? So that's what they did. I had to wear a white helmet because, again, so there's a plastic helmet, and the skin up there, kind of was sagging and so forth. So I had to wear this plastic white helmet for about 2 or 3 months, and get the IV antibiotics every day for the next 6 weeks. And then there was radiation, and for the next 6 weeks. And then there was a third surgery where they put this metal mesh plate in. And they said that, they said that was probably going to be the most painful of the surgeries because I would wake up pretty quickly, but then also they would have to stretch my scalp out back over this metal mesh plate. So again, it was very painful. And they gave me opioids that I could take, every 3 hours. I was in the intensive care unit. And so I did. I took one every 3 hours, and then and got out of the ICU And then the second day I took 3 opioids spaced out as they asked me to, and then the next 2 days I took 1 each day in order to help me fall asleep. And just after 4 days, I was addicted. Like there was like wicked withdrawals. I disposed of the opioids as they said. I actually put them in the coffee grounds, but yeah, there was just like wicked withdrawals, so I think, again, as I move through this, I think God gave me just a small taste of like what all of the different victims experienced and are still experiencing in this. And so again, a lot of the different victims I've talked to are on opioids or addicted to opioids or drugs or anything that they could use to numb their pain. So I come back to the parishes, and they said that I could work with the chemo that I was doing, but they didn't mean be a priest, because the very first day I was on chemo, I had a daily mass at one of my parishes, and about 2 minutes before mass started, I realized I was having like a panic attack, which I had never even had. And I heard people talk about panic attacks. I had friends, they were like, I get panic attacks. I'm like, oh gosh, what is that? But I realized, and again, because you can't really understand it until you have it happen to you, that was a full-blown panic attack. And that was one of the most painful 20 minutes of my life, trying to say that mass while having a panic attack. And so I did it as quickly as I could, and then went back over to the rectory and didn't move for the next 3 days, basically. I was in so much pain, and so then the side effects from the chemo were anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation. So the Archdiocese, then I asked for 2 weeks off, because I thought if I came back, once I got the chemo under control and the nausea medicine and everything like that, I could come back. But so then I come back 2 weeks later, and for my first mass back is a Saturday night mass at one of my parishes. And about 2 minutes before mass starts, I feel the same thing starting to happen. And so I have to go out in front of the parish from the AMBO and say, I can't have mass. I need to take a 9-month leave of absence. And so I'm sure that the people that are at that mass, 2 minutes before it starts, are like, why can't you just go over to the altar and read from the missal you're reading, but so anyway, I had a great appreciation for the people who can't come to Mass, the victims that can't come to Mass. I've talked to a lot of them. They say they want to come to Mass, they want to be in Mass, but they can't still. And so having all of these experiences just helped me say, like, that's okay. That God understands, right? And so I've been able to just tell them, the obligation doesn't apply to you. And then I got the 9 months of medical leave. I went down actually with my best friend, Father Meyer, and I'm now the pastor of the place where I did 9 months of medical leave in Yorkville, which is just crazy. God's in control. But those 9 months were really dark. I had anxiety and depression a lot of the time. And then also there was one time where suicidal ideation is also one of the side effects of the chemo. So there was one time where Father Meyer called and was like, hey, I'm getting Chipotle. I can pick it up. And I said, no, I'm going to go get it, because it was snowy and icy outside, and I hoped that someone would hit me and that I would die. And so I confessed that once I was in the right state of mind. But so just the anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation are also things that all these different victims of priest abuse have reported, and some obviously have carried out the suicidal ideation as well. So anyway, after the 9 months of chemo and basically experiencing everything that victims, or just getting a small taste of all the things that the victims experienced, I went back to the parishes, and everything was going well. I was getting an MRI every 3 months. And then in March of 22, there was a really grim MRI that the tumor had started to grow back, and then it had spread to my pituitary gland. And so at that point, I was perfectly fine to die. I'd already told everyone I was not doing any more chemo. I wasn't doing any more radiation, and if it came back, I was just going to let it run its course. And so it did come back, and again, it spread to my pituitary gland. But I did think, I had gotten the diagnosis on the feast day of Our Lady of Lourdes, and so I thought, well, if I go to Lourdes and am healed there, that might bring some fallen away Catholics back to the parish, and also some fallen away Catholics in my family back to the Catholic Church. And so I did. I went to Lourdes in June of 22, and I was healed there. And people will ask, did you feel anything? And the answer is no, because there was no pain associated with the brain tumor at that time. But I did have a regularly scheduled MRI 2 weeks after I got back from Lourdes. And they said I was getting them every 3 months. And when I went to get the results of the MRI, I met with my doctor. And he said that the tumor, I didn't need to come back for 4 months. So when I got my MRI in 4 months, and then went back and met with the doctor to get the results, he said, you don't need to come back for 7 months. And then I said, well, why not? And he said that the tumor is gone, and the only thing that's showing up on the MRI is the scar tissue in your brain from the first surgery. And so I put it together that I was healed. I had gotten off all social media during chemo, and I'm infinitely happier for that. I now have a dumb phone. I just kept my YouTube channel up. I got rid of everything because especially during chemo, just many of the blessings that came through chemo, but I think just slowing down and realizing, because Pope Benedict had asked priests to get on social media in 2010, and I hated everything. I hated Facebook, I hated blogs. The only blog that I knew of was from a cousin who blogged about shoes in Starbucks, and the Facebook was just kind of coming online. And when I was getting ordained as a priest, and I didn't see really any merit to that either. But I loved Pope Benedict, so I got on, and so I had a pretty significant social media following, which in retrospect, I think the main reason that happened was so that I could get in touch with all these victims. And so I see God's hand, as we always do when we look back. Well, I see what you were doing with all that. But anyway, so I did keep my YouTube channel up. And so I put out a YouTube video to the victims because I was getting questions from victims. How are you doing? How's it going? And so I put out a video on YouTube that, hey, I was healed at Lourdes, and so thank you for all the prayers. And that video went viral, and it made it over to Lourdes the next morning. The Bishop of Lourdes and the head medical examiner at Lourdes both saw the video, and they called the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. And they said, we're getting media inquiries from all over the world about this Father John Hallowell, who says he was healed here. We don't know who Father John Hallowell is, so please put us in touch with him, which is the French way, I think, of saying we're upset with Father Hallowell. And I didn't even know there was a medical, I didn't know that there was any medical board over there. I didn't know you had to have, I had no idea, right? So I've been working with them. I got in touch with them, and I've been working with them for about 3 years now. I've gone back to Lourdes. I made a vow. When I went and was healed, I went by myself, and the trip was total chaos, from beginning to end, which I'm sure some of that was the devil, but also just me not really knowing. I thought more people over there spoke English. I was wrong, or at least they pretend to not speak English. And so anyway, it was just chaos. But so I've gone back, though. There was a priest that pointed out to me this group called the North American Lourdes Volunteers. And so I've gone over with them the last 3 years, and I'm going to be going with them every year now. They're an amazing group of people that help terminally ill people get over to Lourdes, right? And so anyway, when I went over with them, one of the times I got to meet with the larger medical board. So the way that the board works over there is the shrine employs one doctor, and then all the rest of the consultants just volunteer their time from all over the world. They have Catholic doctors, non-Catholic doctors, atheist doctors, because they want to make sure that they do a very thorough job of kind of ruling out any medical explanations. And so when I got to meet, went over there a couple of years ago and got to meet with the larger board, they just happened to be in town. And so they said that the most recent miracle took 11 years, and they said that was fast. And so I've been working with him for 3 years, so only 400% more time to go. So I'm not expecting anything, but again, they said when I went over there 2 years ago with this board, I got to celebrate a Mass with the Bishop of Lourdes in the grotto. And before Mass, we were just in the sacristy, and he said, we're hoping that you might be the first miracle from the United States, because we've never had a miracle from the United States. So anyway, whatever God does with that, thanks be to God. But anyway, I think just in summary, I think this whole thing has just made me a much more happy and joyful priest. I think because, again, living out that, like laying down your life for other people, that I think is the call of priests, right? Jesus says, unless you lay down your life, you will not, and you pick up your cross, you cannot be my disciple. And I have found great joy. I think a lot of times we hear that and we think, oh my goodness, that's going to be hard. That's going to make me miserable. But what I have found, again, is that living out my priesthood in the way that God has asked me to do that has made me much more joyful through all of this, much more at peace, much more calm, and so forth. And so, again, it's been an amazing journey, and every day as a priest, I think, has been an adventure. And I thank the Serrans from all over the world for praying for priests in a special way. And again, I'm so blessed to be a priest. And so again, thank you all for your prayers.